one of the things that we've already learned as we go through the Mishnah above a comma is that women are included in damages. In other words, they can claim and be claimed against. And then puzzlingly, the Mishnah concluded vehanizak vehamazik b'tashlumim. The injured and the person doing the injury are both in the compensation. They're both in the payment. And it's difficult to see how that works. Why does the person who's carrying out the injury, why is the person, or we can see why the person carrying out the injury has to compensate, but how does the injured person have to take part in compensation? And we're going to go back and look at a verse, which it's a familiar verse, but we need to pay a little bit more attention to it now. When a man's ox, a person's ox, remember we said this is gender neutral, when a person's ox pushes his neighbor's ox and it dies, they sell the live ox and they divide its price. So in other words, they split. They split the value of the live ox. Vegam et hamet yechetzon. They also divide up the dead animal. So the person that owned the ox actually loses half the value of his live ox, but he gets half the value of a dead ox. And that's for a regular occurrence. So it feels almost as if they both share some of the financial consequences of this accident. This feels a bit like no fault. They both parties share some of the financial consequences of this act. But here's the but. Or noda, if it was known, and this word noda is really important. If it was known, kishor nagah humit mol shil sham. If it was known that this ox was a kind of ox that was in the habit of goring, and velo yishmerenu ba'alav, and its owner didn't guard it properly, shalem yishalem shor tachat hashor vehamet yelo. He must pay ox for ox. He gets the dead one, but he pays ox for ox. In other words, there's some kind of damage which seems to be accidental and both parties share the financial consequences. There's some kind of damage which is known. The verb in Torah is noda. And if the damage is known or predictable, then the owner of the object that carries out the damage carries full financial consequences. A bit like exemplary damages, perhaps in modern law. And we're going to look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says chamisha tamim v'chamisha mu'adim. 5 rank as tam. Tam means simple or ordinary. I translated it here as harmless. 5 are ordinary and harmless. V'chamisha mu'adim. 5 are known. It's the same root as noda in the Torah. 5 and 5. And the Rambam explains, the Maimonides is going to explain this language. He says, Ma bein tam la muad. What's the difference between tam and muad? Harmless and known, or maybe we call it simple. Maybe that's a nice way to put it. And it's called simple if it does damage irregularly, if it's not used to. It's not its usual nature for damage to stem from it. So, the Mishnah will bring the example of an ox, which generally doesn't gore. Generally, an ox doesn't gore another ox. Oxes are pretty pacific kind of animals, but sometimes they do. And that's why it's called simple, it's called harmless. If it doesn't normally happen, it's tam. If umuad nikrat avar asher hu gal she'yavo mimenu hamase, it's called known if it's habitual for this to happen. So, for example, the ox which is known to gore, maybe this is known to be a dangerous ox. And we'll see in the Mishnah that there are other examples of animals which are known to cause damage. And the Rambam's words are tamid or al harov, always or most of the time. If this animal generally causes damage, then there's a special responsibility on the owner to guard it. And of course, if he fails to guard it, he picks up all of the financial consequences. Whereas if the animal is, generally harmless, even if it does do damage, the owner only gets half of the financial consequences. So now we know we've got this background, let's jump into the Mishnah. Chamisha tamim v'chamisha muadim. There are 5 which are tam, and I've translated here as harmless, and 5 which are mu'ad, which I've translated here as known. Habehema eina mu'edet, lo ligach velo lagof velo lashuch velo lirbotz velo livot. Cattle are not known. They don't regularly gore, or push, or bite, or lie down, or kick. So one of these things might happen, but it's not a regular occurrence. So if it does happen, well, the 2 parties concerned will split the financial consequences. But there are other things that cattle regularly do. So Hashem mu'edet lo le'echol et ha'ra'uila. The tooth is known to eat what it's fit for it. If you drive a flock of cattle past a basket of food, then absolutely we know that the ox is going to put his mouth there and eat something. And the leg is known to break as it walks along. If you've got delicate pots on the street and then an ox walks by, well, it's kind of known that the ox is liable to break the pots as he walks along. And well, there are other examples. Vishur hamuad, the warned ox. That's the example that our verse speaks of. You can see, right, the Mishnah is now expanding, radically expanding and categorizing these simple categories in the verse in the Torah. So we know about the warned ox. People told him, oh, your ox is a dangerous ox. The Gemara defines this actually as an ox which is known to gore 3 times. So if it's gored 3 times, it's known to be a dangerous ox. So we're the warned ox. V'shura mazik birshut hanizak, and the ox that damages in the domain of the damaged party. So we've already said, look, if the ox comes into my garden, then absolutely the owner is responsible for it. The owner should not have let it into my garden. And finally, the ha-adam, and the human being. The human being is absolutely responsible for whatever damage it causes. Now, we're not saying, by the way, a human being is known to cause damage. You can see here the Mishnah is expanding the definition in the Torah, but we're saying that if a human being causes damage, he's absolutely responsible for the consequences. He doesn't split the consequences with the other party. And we'll see from the Mishnah, there are other kinds of objects which are known to be dangerous. So, hazeh, ve'ha'ari, ve'ha'dov, ve'ha'namer, ve'ha'pardeles, ve'ha'nachash, the wolf and the lion and the bear and the leopard and the panther and the snake, they're all known. Hare elu muadin. That it means to say they're known to be dangerous. So the owner has to take care of them. Rabbi Elazar disagrees. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Bizman shehein tarbut. If you've tamed them, einan muadim, then they're not known. If they're tamed, they could be assumed to be tamed. V'hanachash muad le'olam. But the snake is always known. A snake is always dangerous, whether it's a pet or not. And then the Mishnah concludes, Ma bein tam la muad. So what is the practical difference between harmless and known? What difference does it make? Well, we've seen, of course, in the verse from the Torah, Eila shehatam mishalem chatzi nezek umigufo. The harmless pays half damages from its own body. And that means, by the way, the owner's body, unless, of course, it's a human being causing the damage. The harmless pays half damages. So the two owners will split the damages. And the known, vehamu'ad, if you should have taken care of something and you don't take care of it, vehamu'ad mishlem nezek shalem minha alaya, and the known pays full damages from the best property. That is to say, the owners. So if you're guarding, if you're taking care of an object which is known to be dangerous, then you have full responsibility for the consequences of anything that happens if something goes wrong.